500 signatures, I'm not positive, to just give it a little more attention and clean it up and try to activate it a little more for the community's use. And also in conjunction with programs that are offered at the rec center that's right next to it. So that's a great thing. Last week they presented it before the Environmental Advisory Board, and the Environmental Advisory Board signed on a letter of support of that initiative as well. So I thought that was a good thing. We as the council are still looking at Coachman Park and how it will operate and what we will add in for this value-added amenities. I continue to advocate for sustainability features, eco-friendly features, and so those meetings will continue in May. And then in looking more closely at our park system, so there are a number of residents that are very passionate about the parks, and they communicate with me regularly, and they kind of do an inventory, and they actually have a copy of that big park map that I showed you at an earlier meeting. And so according to that map, we have 24 neighborhood parks. And so some of the questions they're looking at is how many have a pavilion or covered picnic table area. According to their research, there are only 5 covered areas. How many have benches? And what are the guidelines or criteria to have a bench installed in a city park? So these are things that they're working on to try to get some answers. We have 27 outdoor restrooms listed in the Clearwater magazine. How many are open for the public during the day to use, and what's the process or procedure to have those open if somebody's going to have a party or an event at a park? Do we have instructions posted on facilities doors on how to do that? And then there was another comment from a resident about the trail from Coachman Ridge to Del Oro, that it's about a 4.5-mile trail, but there are no bathrooms along the way. And that's what I've got. I hope you guys all have a great evening.
Thank you, Councilmember Beckman. Any other citizens to be heard? Seeing none, we'll move to item 4.1 in the agenda, identify a date for annual report. Mr. Halios, I'm trying to recall our last discussion on that. Seems like we were, we reported to the City Council each year. We hadn't done that before the end of the last year, and so we were talking about the possibility of when we might schedule that for this year.
Sure. Jim Halios, Director of Parks and Recreation. And speaking to the Chair, Mr. Rector, we did identify some possible dates moving forward to provide a report. I think we wanted to establish if we were going to move onto the monthly time frame to have the meetings, which now has been established that monthly meetings will take place. So we can leave that, we can leave that up to the board to decide how and when you want to have that annual report, and I can work with the clerk's office and work with council to provide you with some dates that we can go ahead and move forward with that.
Any questions or comments by the board on?
I do. It seemed like I read from the minutes of the meeting of January 26th, there was a discussion about the fact that there was no annual meeting report made for 2020. And that it was proposed perhaps that when the meeting date was established for the 2021 report, we might make the report for 2020 at the same time. And I thought that was a bit unusual in that we would be reaching back to activities that took place in 2020. It's unfortunate that we failed to submit the annual report, as I think we were supposed to do back in December. But I would like to suggest that once we set the meeting, the report date, that we basically restrict it to the 2021 activities rather than reaching back to 2020 activities. That's just my thoughts, though.
Mr. Rodriguez?
I sympathize also, but I also think on principle we should just get it done, just to say, hey, here it is, we did our part for, even though it's late, I think just to set the principles, hey, we got that done, even though late, that's out of the way and we can move forward. So there's no gaps in the future, I guess. So people don't look back and say, there's a gap, might as well just take care of it on principle.
So we might do both reports at the same time?
Quickly, yeah. I mean, if we could do it quickly, I mean, there isn't really much because of COVID. We really couldn't do much on 2020, so I'm sure it would be abbreviated. Right. Just to say, hey, Kate, cross it off.
Mr. Thomas?
When is this report normally done? December, is it?
Yes.
mean, I'm okay with what Mr. Rafferty said, kind of just combine them, but maybe do it, well, combine them, but do it at the end of the year, so that we're not doing a half-year report. And then, since you did say there's nothing to really add in 2020, there's not much, we could probably combine them both. You know, saying, here's what we did in 2020 that went into 2021 within the same report. That's just my thoughts.
I agree with that. I think we can combine.
Would anyone on the board like to propose a date for that report?
When's our meeting, when's the last meeting of the year? Is there one in November?
We're going monthly now. When does
Are we monthly now?
when does monthly start if we are doing monthly from now on?
Yeah, I believe it's a 6-month trial, if I have that correct, starting with this month, even though this was our scheduled one anyways. So, you know, if it pleases the board, we could probably look to do something in either October or November, just depending on what works, you know, for you guys, just because, especially with, let me look at that November date, because we're what, the 4th Tuesday of the month, correct? 1, 2, 3. In November, that falls on Thanksgiving week, so, you know, my suggestion would be either October, or if you wanted to push it to December.
I believe, is it the report given to the council itself, though, however? It's a report that we generate, but I believe it's presented to the council.
Yeah, it's presented to the council, so we can, Nicole, do you know, do we do 2 or 1 meetings for council in November? 2, okay, so again, you know, if we could do that in November and try to pick for that first meeting if that's when you want to have that.
Is there a motion to present the report at the first council meeting in November?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
So moved by Member Thomas, second by Vice Chair Rodriguez. Any discussion among the board? Any citizen comment on the motion? Hearing none, proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. We'll present the annual report at the first council meeting in November. Item 4.2, discuss board support of parks and recreation activities. Member Raftery.
Yes, this is an agenda item that I had posed Mr. Halios for some input or perspective from yourself. First of all, because you are now the Director of Parks and Recreation. I didn't have the chance of meeting you back in January. But from that position, I'm wondering what you could share with the board as to your perspective as to what we can help contribute to improving the operation of Parks and Recreation. We understand what our charter is from the council as to how advising them and so forth and acting upon issues as requested by them. But I'm wondering what we could do in conjunction with yourself on Parks and Recreation to assist your department as you go forward on various programs.
Sure. I think, you know, one of the things that we've had discussions about as far as with the role of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and in relation to council is really to be the eyes and ears of the citizens and to represent them to the council and to the department. So is in particular a defined role that for my expectations with the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, I don't know per se that I have a defined one. It would just be to keep those lines of communication open towards me. And when you see things or you have issues, bring them to my attention, and then we'll work through that. And I think kind of, you know, one of my goals as we move forward in this process is to create you know, more synergy between us and the department, and to, you know, I think get the board involved in more activities that we have going on, and to allow us to have that, you know, kind of form of communication, because like Mr. Rodriguez said, you know, 2020 was just a mess with COVID and everything. We were very limited to our interactions of what we could do. But I think, you know, having our meetings moving on to a monthly basis instead of quarterly are going to allow for much more interaction between all of us and a dialogue and discussion. And, you know, part of that also is going to be me keeping you abreast of activities and things that we have going on, so we can, you know, kind of venture out into the community together, and you're getting that feedback from the citizens. So as far as an advocacy piece, I don't really have any, because, you know, I kind of work at the will of the council and also work for the advisory board to help you kind of answer your questions, and then also identify any areas of improvement and things of that nature.
In that vein, my question then would be, typically we would propose our information directly to the liaison to yourself, Mr. Michael Lavery. He's no longer in that position. I assume that we can send any information we have directly to you. And my next question would be, do you have any ideas of the time frame for appointing a replacement for Mr. Lavery?
We are actually looking, and we have, the applications have been kind of received, so we're looking within the next, I would say probably 30 days to have that done, but I'm going to maintain being the board liaison through my entirety. I just feel that, you know, being as the new Parks and Recreation Director, it's important for me to, and you to all have establish a very positive relationship and for us to continue on. So whoever we hire to be his replacement will have other duties as assigned, but as far as being the liaison for the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, it's going to be me. So I will keep that, and, you know, I'm really looking forward to nurturing this relationship going forward.
Excellent.
Any other questions of board members on this agenda item? Any questions or comments from citizens on this agenda item?
Thanks for asking about that. I love the open flow of information idea, and that Mr. Halios is here. One thing that I'm looking for, just personally speaking for myself, is evidence that you all are reaching out to a variety of citizens and residents. And so I'd like to hear that from board members, like, what are your varied experiences, and are people throughout our city being represented in our discussions? So that's important. That's something that I intentionally do as a council member, and I think it's important to have you know, the diversity of our residents represented here as we talk about everything related to parks.
On the specimen point, I think we discussed this a while back ago, several months ago, where now going to monthly meetings, we can have a better dialogue with the Parks and Recreation Department. And also, my personal, I'm trying to go to all the parks that we have, and it takes a while because we do have a lot of them. And not to backtrack, but also with the 2020 report, I wanted to make sure, just like Mr. Halio said, it was a mess. And I want to make sure everyone knows on paper how good they did managing this situation, especially for the type of city with the tourism we have and the parks and the activities that we had, even during COVID, the way it was managed. I think I want to make sure it's also put on paper that they did a great job. And that's what I want us to do, is like going forward, month by month, making sure that we support that, we emphasize that, and promote it, and also connect more with the public, like you said.
I do think it's it's also important that we engage the community, and that we think in our personal conversations with Clearwater citizens that we know, or maybe they talk about an experience they've had with our Parks and Recreation in Clearwater, that we enter a level of inquiry with them to ask them about their experience, much like, you know, a business would ask its customers how their experience was in the use of our Parks and Recreation programs. I've been trying to do that more, and I've also been trying to, and I think we might get to it later in comments, to try to educate myself on some of the programs of Clearwater Parks and Recreation that I'm not familiar with. For example, I was not entirely familiar with the volunteer program, so I participated in a couple of events this past week with the volunteers, see what kind of citizen engages in that activities, got to know the director for that area, very talented person and very capable of organizing. But for me personally, as a board member, it's been interesting and enlightening to get to know the programs of the city better, so that I can hopefully address needs and concerns that come up with regard to Parks and Recreation, and advise the staff well. So, any other comments?
I think I'm a member of a neighborhood group up in the countryside area, and their topics and discussions range a whole variety of topics, and some of them not very relevant to normal things, if you will. But there were some things that did come up relative to Parks and Recreation. So I use that as a forum for me to be aware of something that concerns them. And we've actually taken care of a couple of complaints that took place relative to some lighting being blocked by trees. They got taken care of by the Parks and Recreation Group. And so I'm going to keep an eye out for that. Also, I would like to think that with the advent of vaccinations being quite widespread, we might find more members of the public showing up for these meetings, particularly if we have on a monthly basis, on issues that are important to them. Some of the things that Councilwoman Beckman mentioned from those citizens groups, they might very well come here and speak directly to us about that. So I think as that happens with more vaccinations, hopefully we'll get more presence from the public speaking.
Any other questions or comments? With that, we'll move on to item 4.3, Coachman Park Conservancy discussion. Mr. Hallihouse?
Yes, we are on the street with a RFP for a consultant to meet with various stakeholders, this body included, to look to form a conservancy for the park aspect of Coachman Park. So I believe the RFP closes in the next week or two. I'll have to double check on that, and then we should have a consultant engaged. And then my hope is that at our next meeting, if we have someone selected by the May meeting, if not at the latest the June meeting, if we can't have them join us personally, they'll join us remotely to probably have some questions for the board or the questions that you may have for them, and that, they may set up some separate times to speak with the respective board members to kind of get your feedback and your opinion as we move forward with establishing a conservancy.
Questions or comments from the board? Questions or comments from any citizens? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 4.4, Crest Lake Park grand opening. Mr. Hallios, could you give us a summary of?
Yes, we had a wonderful grand opening yesterday at Crest Lake Park. We had a soft opening probably about 2 weeks ago, but the full grand opening with appropriated staff and city officials and members of this body that were there, so it went really well. The reception from the public has been fantastic. Everyone's pleased with it. It is going to be a new type of process for us, just for the fact that this was the first spray park we have within the city, so it's going to be a unique feature. And this is the kind of the first park that we actually have active staff members that are scheduled and staged out of the park. So we have a three-man crew that works out there, one supervisor and two of what we call our senior park service techs. And one of those staff members will be there at all times during the operation of the park hours. So that, with having a bathroom being open, that's one of the things that drives that, is to be able to have that staff there and maintain a presence within the park. And also the spray park, as you and I discussed, that's something that is it's a first for us, but you really need to have an attendant and somebody there to monitor things. The Department of Health requires every day that we take chlorine readings, and so, we need to be in compliance with that. So that kind of drove that aspect of the park. So not only do we have that initial capital investment of $5.7 million, we have an annual investment of staff in there. So, council is very committed to seeing that park succeed and be a success, and we're starting off on the right foot.
Any questions or comments from the board members on this item?
I think it was a wonderful accomplishment by the Parks and Recreation and the city, as well as the previous administration of the city, in moving toward this. In addition to that, the local television stations gave a great deal of publicity to the opening of that park, including interviewing people that were from the Skycrest area or that were at the park. And one of the points they kept making was that this is an area they can go to now to kind of break out of their COVID isolation. Volleyball, get out and walk about, do this and do that. And I just thought it was a fantastic follow-on to the great opening that you had, that people are really taking advantage, and all had great comments about it. Wonderful publicity.
Yeah, and I've said it repeatedly that I think it's the best one we've done so far. And, it really is. Kind of the unique aspect of it is that it's it has the elements of a nature park, but also an active park, but it's in an urban setting, and that's really, to be able to pull that off is something that's pretty unique, and we're very proud of it.
Any other comments from the board? I also want to just add, I complimented you, complimented Mr. Cater, who was predecessor, and city manager Horn, just on just, as was mentioned earlier, it's a multi-use park. There's something in it for everyone. But yet it's naturally beautiful. We were able to maintain the natural beauty of the park and enhance that, really. And just an incredible asset to Clearwater and not just that neighborhood, but to the city as a whole. So congratulations. Hearing nothing further, we'll move on item 4.4. We'll go to item 4.5, McMullen Tennis Complex new hours. Mr. Halios?
Yes, we had staff commission a study of some additional hours that we could open over at the McMullen Tennis Complex, because we've had some demand to have extended hours on the weekend and also during times during the week in which we kind of have a lull there. We only have 2 full-time staff at that current location, and the rest of it's filled with part-time staff, so that's why we have those staggered schedules. So we did some kind of fact-finding within the group of tennis players that play there, and we're going to be opening with some additional hours on Saturdays, on the weekends, to try to fill that in. And I think as we move along, if we can identify opportunities to be a little more leaner and meaner, then maybe we can look to adding to those hours. But as of right now, we identified a need to be open additional hours on Saturday to accommodate players that usually can't play during the week or in that time on Saturday morning as well.
Questions, comments from the board? Mr. Hood?
I think that's great. I've heard a lot of comments from tennis players in the area, and I'm very connected with them. And I think additional hours at McMullen, I mean, that is the place to play tennis in Clearwater. It's a very nice complex. And on Saturday, and then also, during the week, in the time in the afternoon that they're closing, I've heard requests for them to stay open too, and I understand it's a staffing issue. But that seemed to be a prime time for drop-ins. Like, players who just want to come and play, don't have to sign up for a clinic, they can just come and meet new players and play. So I can extend more questions to some of the people that I see and talk to, and kind of get a feel for what hours would make sense, and I can try to provide that feedback for you.
No, that would be great. And what we did is, initially we had struggled because we had some people that they came forward and they said, well, we'd like to have it during the week, we'd like to have it on the weekend, and staff and I were like, okay, well, let's ask. We only, and with the pretense that, hey, we have a limited amount of resources, we're going to be able to we've identified 4 hours that we can free up. Where would you like to see them? And I felt that was a positive thing, that staff kind of reached out to them to make sure that, okay, we're providing, we're giving you the power to decide what you want, but know that we have a limited amount of resources. But that would be helpful to kind of get that back. And then, as we move forward, if there's ways that we can get creative about it, then we can identify those other opportunities as well.
Any other board member comment? Any comment from the citizens? Hearing none, we'll move to item 4.6, pickleball in the Clearwater area. Mr. Halios?
Yes. We have had quite a demand in pickleball courts. So we do not have any really permanent pickleball courts. Or when I say permanent courts, I mean tennis courts that would be lined for pickleball. We have a couple at McMullen, but we've had a lot of requests in some of our neighborhood parks to have that done. So what we're doing now is we are kind of doing a pilot program over at the Clearwater Beach Rec Center. We're taking one court out there and we're painting lines for pickleball. The net stays as a tennis court net, so the lines will be different colors, and then people as a drop-in can go and get a pickleball net and play pickleball out there, so all the racket sports are kind of in the same area. The issue that we had is that where it's most popular at the Clearwater Beach Recreation Center is they use 3 to 4 courts on the basketball court, and that's fine when it's just pickleball. But if they want to just do a drop-in game of pickleball, they wind up having to play next to a basketball player, and that winds up being, it doesn't mix well. So we've identified that we're going to do that there. And then one of the other things that we're looking at is we have, kind of the traditional model when we built community parks, or neighborhood parks, I should say, was that you put a tennis court in the park with a playground set. So we're kind of looking to identify geographic, strategic locations that we can all do the same thing that we're going to do. So people could bring either, their own net out there, or they could even utilize the existing tennis court net, because a lot of these drop-in pickleball players, they're not concerned. The pickleball net traditionally, I believe, is a little bit lower, but they're not concerned as much with that. So we're trying to address that need with existing resources and, just try to maximize the ability for every citizen to utilize our facilities.
Very good. Questions or comments from board members?
Yeah, I think
Mr. Hood?
there's a big demand for pickleball courts. It's one of the fastest growing sports in the U.S. and very popular in Florida and in the area. So I think it's good, to be able to put more courts where you can. I understand that it's easier to put lines on a tennis court because you can fit 2 pickleball courts on a tennis court, actually. But that does take away a tennis court. And it's actually it's 2 separate groups, pickleball players and tennis players. There's some tennis players that convert to pickleball, but it's actually, there's a lot of just new pickleball players. So we don't want to give up too many tennis courts because, there's tennis players who still want to play out there. I think it would be advantageous. I know it would be a little more money, but to build standalone pickleball courts, they can be, or maybe have a bigger pickleball complex at McMullen if there's space, or to do that. I think that would be utilized. For sure. And so those are my thoughts on that.
There's quite a deal of activity up in the Countryside Rec Center with respect to pickleball, but they use the basketball courts there as well. In fact, what I was wondering, is it possible that in lieu of building or modifying tennis courts, that the basketball courts could be allocated to pickleball under some type of scheduling where those that are enthusiastically playing pickleball could play on some regular basis without conflicting with those that want to come in and do pickup games of basketball, et
Yeah,
cetera?
and traditionally, that's, like I could tell you at the Clearwater Beach Rec Center, that's what we do. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, from 8 to 11 is strictly pickleball, so there's no basketball.
Okay.
So where we have that demand, we are doing that. And to speak into what Mr. Hood has mentioned, we have identified a, possible location for a pickleball-only complex out on the beach, where we put it in our capital funding plan. Actually, the fire station's being rebuilt. So what they're going to do is they're temporarily relocating over to McKay Park. And so it's going to get torn up with them being at McKay Park. So part of that process is, okay, when they go back to the fire station and they vacate McKay Park, is that maybe that's an area where we put, 4 only pickleball courts. So, we are looking at trying to do that in just the kind of a designated area. But to speak to your point, we do that like at Countryside. I know a lot of times on their indoor basketball courts, we will specifically just block out time where it's just pickleball, so we don't get that overlap.
Any other comments from board members? Any comments from citizens?
I remember, I think I remember on the campaign trail that some people talked about pickleball being played at maybe North Greenwood or Ross Norton Rec Center, and that when summer camp came in, some of the pickleball players were displaced. They were not happy. Was there indoor pickleball at one of those indoor rec centers, or one of the?
Yes, I believe, if not one or both of them, but, unfortunately, our scheduled programs, like a summer camp program, takes precedence over a drop-in program. We try to accommodate, but, you're not going to make everybody happy. So that's, in those programs, the first priority is for those scheduled programs. And I can tell you at Ross Norton and at North Greenwood, those are JWB funded programs, so we have to make sure that we're doing the correct thing per our contract. So we don't have as much leeway with certain things as some.
And that's fine. I wouldn't want to compromise the summer camp at all. But I was wondering, to me, I've never, sat and watched the pickleball inside, but it seems to me it's an older demographic. And is there a possibility of opening up those indoor recs from like 5 to 8 or 5 to 7 a.m. for pickleball only before the
It would just depend on, use. If we thought that we had the demand for it, we'd look at it. But again, it's reallocation of resources because traditionally those rec centers are open at 7 o'clock. So we would need to find how we would staff those hours. So again, it's just one of those things.
Okay.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll move to item 5.1 under old business, Imagine Clearwater project update. Mr. Helios?
Yes. So Imagine Clearwater project is moving forward. We have our, kind of went through with our 90% plans, and then we're going to be going with some recommendations to council as far as, I wouldn't say recommendations, more so the kind of a menu list of options. And so when I have that information available, I'll share it with the board so they can take a look at it. And so what that will entail is then that will allow us to, look at items that can be added back into the project, or items that could be taken out. Kind of what we've approached in, what Assistant City Manager Delk has given is basically kind of the baseline of where we believe the project should be at. And so any enhancements that will come forward will need to be added back in, and we'll have associated pricing with that to add that back in.
Questions from the board? Questions from citizens? Hearing none, we'll move to item 5.2, Morningside tennis court lighting. Mr. Helios?
Yes, we've, Morningside Tennis Court lighting is finally kind of up and running. We've had some, I wouldn't say issues, but some concerns from some citizens at adjacent properties regarding the height of the poles, because LED poles are much higher. Traditionally, the poles are 35 feet for the what we call the halo lighting, where an LED pole is 50 foot. So there's an appearance that it's much higher, which it is, and I think a lot of the people are not, pleased with that. And unfortunately, I think some of the property owners may have moved in the time from when we initially had lights there to when it was removed. And then there was kind of a break of maybe about 10 years where we didn't have lights at that facility. And then at that time, the Parks and Rec Board had given a recommendation to council to look at adding lights back. Morningside Recreation Complex was completed. That's what we did. We added the lights back in, and we looked to do it as energy efficient as possible. The LED lights were going to be a test case for us. And so that's kind of where we've been at with that. We've had a couple citizens call the manager's office and come to council voicing their concerns, but council is in support of the decision that the Parks and Rec Board made, 2 years ago, and that council subsequently made after that, of having the lights in the tennis court there. And we're excited to have LED lights because we're really looking forward to seeing what type of energy savings we get out of that. So that's going to be our kind of our test pilot program in that area as well.
Questions from the board?
So are the courts open now? Are they open currently?
Yes, they are.
And at Morningside, is it LED lighting, did you say, or is
That
it?
is correct. It's
Okay.
LED light.
Questions or comments from citizens? Hearing none, we'll move to item 6, Director's Report. Mr. Helios?
Do not have anything to report other than the items that were discussed for new business.
Move to item 7, board members to be heard. Mr. Thomas, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I just had a few one question from some citizens about the walking path behind Spectrum Field, which is now, I guess, Baycare Field. I guess that's shut down right now? It's closed?
Yes, the county is doing a project out there.
Oh, okay.
So, I'll look to, I believe we were contacting them this week to kind of get an update on when that was going to be
Okay.
done. So we'll,
Some people were just asking me, because I guess they walk that, ride bikes there, and
gotcha.
wondering when that was going to be back up and running. That's all I have.
Mr. Raftery?
Yes, I'm not going to talk about any specific items right now, new items, if you will. I'm going to add those to the agenda from people I've heard about some issues to be looked at, so we can see them on the agenda, have time to discuss them, and Mr. Helios to prepare for them and so forth. But I did want to make mention of something that was a bit of a surprise to me that my wife pointed out to me, in that evidently a very nice mural was put on the North Greenwood Recreation Center by a volunteer, and she saw it posted on Facebook. And I was in another room, and she said, "Did you see this mural that's being put in the North Greenwood Rec Center? We're having a grand opening of it." And Rondi Barber's actually speaking at it because it's part of a group that he's involved in. So I really didn't, but she brought me out and showed me what it was and so forth. And I'm not certain how that began or got started, but quite frankly, it seemed to be quite an impressive mural that was done and seemed to be quite well received by the neighborhood there at North Greenwood Rec Center. So I just wanted to make sure that you're commended as to the role that Parks and Recreation had in that, because I just don't think you let people come in and paint murals on the building without any prior authorizations. The other thing, this might be more for the chairman than anybody, is that I noticed in the minutes from the 26th of January meeting, Councilmember Beckman had a number of things she brought to our attention and so forth relative to Parks and Recreation, as well as relative to our roles as members of the advisory board. And I was wondering, how will we approach a follow-up on some of those suggestions or items that were made back on January 26th? For example, I don't see any of them on the agenda for tonight's discussion. And one in particular struck me was where she had asked a question about the standardization of recreation center hours, for example, between North Greenwood, Countryside, whatever, that we would at least discuss it or be aware of there might be some changes that could be made. So how would you recommend we approach some of those things that were brought up on the 26th of January to address them moving forward? Add them to an agenda?
I believe so.
Okay.
And a lot of the things that were addressed were board involvement and with the citizens and
Yep.
engagement. We've got more involved and engaged, and but I think that's probably the best place to put it. Now we're meeting monthly. It would come up here soon.
Right.
So we put that on the agenda for the next meeting.
Very good.
Go back to that.
That's all I have.
Mr. Hood? Okay. Vice Chair Rodriguez.
Thank you.
I just want to mention one thing, and that is just part of, I did a couple things this past week. Volunteered for 2 park cleanups and then for a beach cleanup. And what I've been learning is the importance to the vitality of our parks of neighborhood involvement and neighborhood ownership of the parks in their neighborhood. That where I see citizens using the park, they seem to be frequently. They seem to be take ownership in that park and pride in that park and the appearance. And I hope that we, as we get out as board members, we encourage these folks in the neighborhood to really take ownership. And then I know out on North Beach, one of the citizens out there has an idea of a community garden, not a huge garden, but something that they could come together as a neighborhood and support and water and grow things. And but to me, it's a very small triangle park. It's not. It would be great. It's something that the city has to take care of, and if the citizens out there around that park on North Beach would take ownership of it and take care of it for the community, I think it does 2 things. It increases the engagement of our citizens, and it also probably creates a better and more well-maintained park than if everybody's relying on the city staff to come by and take care of it for them. So it's not something I didn't already know before, but something that certainly has come to my eyes here and being involved and seeing the importance today. And I'm sure it'll be Crest Lake Park, the success of that park over a span of years, how well it's maintained. We're fortunate to have 3 staff members dedicated to maintain that park, keep it nice, but it still takes a community neighborhood ownership to it to make sure that it's maintained in a good way. So that's one thing I've seen, and hopefully the rest of the board will get out and engage, and as you said, Vice Chair Rodriguez, get out and see some of our parks and come back with some thoughts or some additional ideas for the board and for the city park staff at the next meeting. So with that, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. Moved by Board Member Thomas.
Second it.
Second by Vice Chair Rodriguez. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion approved, we are adjourned, and then we will see you at the next meeting, which is the fourth Tuesday of May, which would be
Pulling it up right now, 26th.
26th. Thank you for attending and have a good
Right.
evening.